The early morning sun peeked through the tall glass doors of the Grand Plaza Hotel, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor of the lobby. It was just after 6 in the morning, and the hotel was beginning to stir with the start of a new day. Outside, the city was already awake, with cars honking and people rushing to work. But inside the hotel, there was still a peaceful quiet that would soon disappear as guests began to check out and new ones arrived. Among the first staff to arrive was Lucia, a woman in her mid-30s with tired eyes but a determined spirit. She wore the standard gray and blue uniform of the hotel's housekeeping team, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a small silver locket hanging around her neck, a gift from her daughter on her last birthday, purchased with money saved from doing neighborhood chores. Today, like many school holidays and breaks before, Lucia wasn't alone. Walking beside her, clutching a worn backpack filled with books and a small lunchbox, was her daughter Isabel. At 12 years old, Isabel was at that awkward age between childhood and teenage years. Tall for her age, but with a childlike wonder that still sparkled in her eyes when she saw beautiful things. And in a 5-star hotel like the Grand Plaza, there were beautiful things everywhere. "Remember the rules," Lucia whispered in Spanish as they entered through the staff door at the back of the hotel. "Stay in the break room until I come to check on you. Do your summer reading assignment. Don't wander around the hotel and don't bother any of the guests or other workers," Isabel finished with a small smile. "I know, Mama. I've been coming here with you since I was 8. Lucia sighed and brushed a stray hair from her daughter's forehead. "I know, Mia. I just worry. If Mr. Reynolds ever found out I bring you here during school breaks instead of finding childcare." She didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew that Lucia couldn't afford proper childcare on her housekeeping salary, especially after her husband had left them 3 years ago. The hotel's manager, Mr. Reynolds, was strict about staff policies but had turned a blind eye to Lucia's situation after she'd stayed late many nights to help with emergency cleanups and last-minute guest requests. Still, there was an unspoken understanding that Isabel would remain invisible, never causing any trouble that might force the manager to acknowledge her presence. "I'll be good," Isabel promised, adjusting her backpack straps. "Maybe I'll finish my book today." Lucia nodded, leading her daughter through the maze of back hallways that the guests never saw, the veins and arteries of the hotel that kept everything running smoothly. They passed the laundry room, already humming with massive washing machines at work, and the maintenance office where Hector, the longtime handyman, gave them a friendly wave. "Good morning, Lucia." "And hello to you too, little professor," Hector called out, using his nickname for Isabel, who was always reading books beyond her grade level. "I'm not so little anymore," Isabel protested with a laugh. "You'll always be little to an old man like me," Hector replied with a wink. "I brought in some of my wife's churros. They're in the break room if you want one." Isabel's eyes lit up. "Thank you, Mr. Hector." As they continued walking, Lucia felt the familiar twist of guilt in her stomach. She should be able to provide more for her daughter than days spent in a hotel staff break room. Isabel deserved to be in summer programs with other kids, learning music or sports or whatever else interested her. Instead, she was spending her childhood in the shadows of a luxury hotel, hidden away like a secret, watching wealthy guests live lives they could only imagine. The break room was small but clean, with a round table in the center, a few chairs, a mini refrigerator, and a microwave. The walls were a dull beige, brightened only by a bulletin board covered with staff announcements and a faded calendar showing a beach scene from some tropical paradise. It wasn't much, but it had been Isabel's second home for years now. "I have rooms on floors 3 through 5 today," Lucia said, checking the assignment sheet on her phone. "I'll come check on you during my first break around 9:30. Isabel was already pulling out her book, a thick paperback about a young wizard that she'd read at least 3 times before. "I'll be fine, Mama. Go before you're late." Lucia hesitated, then leaned down to kiss the top of her daughter's head. "Te quiero mucho." "I love you too," Isabel replied, already opening her book to a dog-eared page. With one last glance at her daughter, Lucia left to gather her cleaning cart and begin her day. As soon as her mother was gone, Isabel reached for one of Hector's wife's churros, still warm and dusted with cinnamon sugar. She took a bite, savoring the sweetness, and returned to her book. But after nearly an hour of reading the same story she'd read many times before, She found herself growing restless. The break room had no windows, and the wall seemed to close in a little more each time she was there. Isabel closed her book and looked at the clock on the wall. It was not even 8 yet. The day stretched ahead of her, long and uneventful. She pulled out her old tablet, a hand-me-down from a cousin who had upgraded to a newer model. The screen had a small crack in one corner, and it was slow to load, but it still worked well enough for what Isabel needed. She opened a piano app she'd downloaded months ago and put in her earbuds. Music had become Isabel's escape over the past year. She'd discovered it almost by accident when her music teacher at school had noticed how quickly she picked up the simple songs they learned on the classroom's old keyboard. "You have an ear for music," the teacher had told her. And those words had lit something inside Isabel that hadn't been there before. Without money for real lessons or a real piano, she'd turned to free tutorials online and apps that helped beginners learn. Hours spent in the break room had turned into hours of practice, her fingers dancing silently on the tablet screen as she imagined the sounds of a real piano beneath her touch. The hotel had a real piano, a beautiful grand piano that sat in the corner of the lobby. Isabel had seen it many times when walking through with her mother early in the morning or late at night. Sometimes, during special events, professional musicians would play it, filling the lobby with beautiful melodies that made Isabel stop and listen. Pretending she was at a real concert, she had never touched it, never even dared to get close to it. It was an unspoken rule, just like so many others. The line between the world of the hotel staff and the world of the hotel guests. After practicing scales on her tablet for another hour, Isabel grew restless again. She put away her tablet and decided to use the bathroom. The staff restroom was just down the hall and she knew the way well. As she walked back to the break room afterward, she passed by a service door that led into the main lobby. Usually she would ignore it, but today something made her pause. Through the small window in the door she could see a slice of the lobby, the gleaming floors, the fancy furniture, and just the edge of the grand piano in the corner. The lobby looked empty. It was still early, and most guests were either at breakfast or still in their rooms. The front desk staff seemed busy with paperwork, and no one was looking toward the piano. Isabel stood frozen, her hand on the door, as a wild thought entered her mind. What if she just took a quick look at the piano? Not to play it, of course. She would never dare. But just to see it up close, to imagine what it would feel like to sit on the bench and press those ivory keys with her fingers instead of tapping on a glass screen. Before she could talk herself out of it, Isabel pushed the door open just enough to slip through and then walked as casually as she could toward the piano. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it, but no one seemed to notice her. In her simple jeans and t-shirt, she didn't stand out the way her mother did in her uniform. She could almost pass for a guest's daughter if no one looked too closely. The grand piano was even more beautiful up close. Its black surface gleamed under the lobby lights, and Isabel could see her distorted reflection in its perfect shine. She reached out a hand, not quite touching it, hovering just above the smooth wood. "It's gorgeous, isn't it?" Isabel jumped, her hand snapping back as if burned. She turned to find an older woman watching her with a kind smile. The woman wore an elegant blue dress and had silver hair styled in a neat bob. I was just looking," Isabel stammered, taking a step back. "I'm sorry." "No need to apologize for admiring beautiful things," the woman said. "Do you play?" Isabel hesitated, then nodded slightly. "A little. Not on real pianos, though." The woman's eyebrows raised. "Well, that's a shame. Music should be played on proper instruments when possible." She glanced around the lobby, which was still relatively empty, then back at Isabel. "Would you like to try it?" Isabel's eyes widened. "Oh no, I couldn't. It's not allowed." "Not allowed?" The woman looked confused. "It's just a piano, dear. It's meant to be played. I'm Mrs. Chen, by the way. I'm staying in the penthouse suite this week while visiting my granddaughter." "I'm Isabel," she replied automatically, then immediately regretted giving her name. "But I really shouldn't. I need to go." As she turned to hurry back to the safety of the break room, Mrs. Chen called after her. "The offer stands, Isabel. Music is too precious to be silenced." Isabel slipped back through the service door, her cheeks flushed with the small adventure and the temptation that now tugged at her thoughts. The grand piano in the lobby seemed to call to her, promising experiences her tablet could never give. Back in the break room, She tried to return to her book, but her mind kept drifting to the piano and Mrs. Chen's words. Music is too precious to be silenced. For the rest of the morning, as she sat alone in the break room, those words echoed in her mind, along with the image of her reflection in the shining black surface of the grand piano. Days passed, and Isabel continued coming to work with her mother, spending her hours in the break room with her books, tablet, and thoughts of the grand piano. Each day she would take a few minutes to peek through the service door window, watching the lobby and the people who came and went. Sometimes she would see Mrs. Chen sitting in one of the plush chairs, reading a newspaper or chatting with other guests. Once or twice their eyes met and the older woman would smile and give a small nod, as if sharing a secret. During one of these brief exchanges, Mrs. Chen had subtly gestured toward the piano with a raised eyebrow. Isabel had quickly shaken her head and disappeared back into the staff area, her heart racing at the mere thought of touching the forbidden instrument. "Are you feeling okay, mija?" Lucia asked one evening as they walked home together. "You seem distracted lately." Isabel adjusted her backpack. "I'm fine, Mama. Just bored sometimes." Lucia sighed, the weight of working mother's guilt heavy on her shoulders. "I know it's not fun for you sitting in that break room all day. Only 3 more weeks until school starts again." "It's not so bad," Isabel insisted, not wanting to add to her mother's worries. "Hector lets me help sort the maintenance request form sometimes. And I'm learning a lot from my tablet." "Learning what?" Lucia asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Isabel hesitated. She hadn't told her mother about her interest in music, afraid it would seem like a frivolous dream. "Just things. History and science videos." Lucia reached out to squeeze her daughter's shoulder. "You're a good girl, Isabel. Smart too. Someday you'll go to college and have a better job than cleaning hotel rooms." "There's nothing wrong with your job, Mama," Isabel said fiercely. "No, there isn't," Lucia agreed, her voice soft. "But I want more choices for you. That's why we came to this country, for possibilities." They walked the rest of the way home in comfortable silence. But Isabel's mind was still back at the hotel, circling around the grand piano like a moth drawn to a flame. The next morning started like any other. They arrived early. Lucia checked the day's room assignments, and Isabel settled into the break room with her books and tablet. But today felt different somehow, charged with a strange energy that made Isabel restless. When Lucia came to check on her during her first break, Isabel asked a question that had been forming in her mind for days. "Mama, what happens if someone touches the piano in the lobby?" Lucia looked surprised. "Why do you ask?" Isabel shrugged, trying to appear casual. "I just wonder. It's always there, but I never see anyone playing it except during special events." "That piano is very expensive," Lucia explained, taking a sip of her coffee. "Mr. Reynolds has strict rules about it. Only professional musicians hired by the hotel are allowed to play it. Even the guests have to ask permission first." "Has anyone ever broken that rule?" Lucia thought for a moment. "Once, about a year ago, before you started coming here during summer break. A guest's teenage son played it without permission, just banging on the keys. Mr. Reynolds was very angry, and the front desk clerk at the time, I think his name was Dale, almost lost his job for not stopping it right away." Isabel's stomach tightened with anxiety. She hadn't realized the rule was quite that serious. Why so curious about the piano?
Lucia asked. "No reason," Isabel said quickly.
"Just wondering." After her mother left to finish her shift, Isabel tried to focus on her book, but the words swam before her eyes. She kept thinking about what her mother had said, about the strict rules and the consequences for breaking them. She should forget about the piano completely. It wasn't worth the risk. Around noon, Hector poked his head into the break room. "Little professor, I need to fix a leaky faucet on the 2nd floor. Want to come along and be my assistant? Better than sitting in here all day." Isabel jumped at the chance to do something different. "Yes, please." She followed Hector to the maintenance closet, where he grabbed his toolbox, and then to the elevator reserved for staff use. As they rode up to the 2nd floor, Hector chatted about his grandson, who was about Isabel's age. "He's learning to play guitar," Hector said proudly. "Got a good ear for music like his grandmother." "Do you play any instruments, Isabel?" The question caught her off guard. "Not really. I mean, I'd like to learn piano, but..." "Piano, eh? That's a fine instrument. My Rosa played when she was younger. Said it was like having the whole orchestra at your fingertips." Isabel smiled at the description. That's exactly how it feels. Even on my tablet app, it's like I can create a whole world of sound. Hector's eyebrows rose with interest. You practice on a tablet? No real piano? Isabel shook her head. We can't afford one. And lessons cost too much. Hector hummed thoughtfully as they exited the elevator. You know, talent finds a way. My Rosa, she learned by ear, listening to the radio and figuring out the notes. No fancy lessons for her either. They reached room 237, and Hector knocked loudly before using his master key to enter. The room was unoccupied but had been reported to have a dripping bathroom faucet. While Hector worked, Isabel handed him tools and listened to more stories about his family. So this app on your tablet, Hector said as he tightened the last screw on the faucet. How does it work? Does it make real piano sounds? Through headphones, yes, Isabel explained. But it's not the same as a real piano. The keys are just on the screen so you can't feel the weight of them or anything. Hector wiped his hands on a rag and packed up his tools. You know, when the hotel is quiet, like really early in the morning or late at night, sometimes I hear the piano being played. I always figured it was ghosts. Isabel giggled. Ghosts? Sure, Hector said with a wink. All old buildings have ghosts. This hotel is almost 100 years old. I bet there's a ghost pianist who comes out when everyone's asleep. As they headed back downstairs, Isabel couldn't help but ask, Do you really believe in ghosts, Mr. Hector? The old maintenance man shrugged. I believe there are many things in this world we don't understand. And I believe that music is one of the most magical things of all. It can transform a person, you know. His words stayed with Isabel as she returned to the break room. She thought about the ghost pianist Hector had mentioned, and wondered what it would be like to play the grand piano when the hotel was quiet. With no one around to see or hear, the idea took root in her mind and wouldn't let go. That afternoon, while eating her sandwich lunch, Isabel hatched a plan. She knew her mother was assigned to clean the 6th floor today, which usually took until at least 3 o'clock. The front desk clerk working the afternoon shift was Peter, a college student who was always on his phone when the manager wasn't around. And most importantly, she had noticed that between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, the lobby was often nearly empty, as guests were out exploring the city or attending meetings. It was a perfect opportunity, perhaps the only one she would get. At 2:30, Isabel peeked through the service door window. Just as she'd predicted, the lobby was quiet. There were no guests sitting in the lounge area, and Peter was at the front desk, his attention focused on his phone screen. The piano sat in its corner, bathed in a shaft of sunlight from the tall windows. Isabel took a deep breath and pushed the door open. She walked across the lobby with purpose, trying to look like she belonged there. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, but she kept moving forward until she reached the piano. The bench was heavy, solid wood with a padded seat. Isabel carefully pulled it out and sat down, positioning herself the way she'd seen pianists do in videos. The fallboard that covered the keys was closed, and for a moment she hesitated, her hands hovering over it. This was her chance to turn back, to return to the safety of the break room and forget this crazy idea. If someone saw her, if word got back to Mr. Reynolds, her mother could lose her job. The thought made her stomach twist with anxiety, but then she remembered Mrs. Chen's words. Music is too precious to be silenced. And Hector talking about his wife learning to play by ear, about talent finding a way. She thought about all the hours she'd spent tapping on a glass screen, imagining what it would feel like to press real keys, to feel the vibrations of real strings, to make real music. Slowly, carefully, Isabel lifted the fallboard, revealing the gleaming white and black keys beneath. They were even more beautiful up close, smooth and perfect, waiting for someone to bring them to life. She placed her fingers on the cool keys, not pressing down yet, just feeling their texture against her fingertips. For a moment, she just sat there, savoring the sensation. Then, very gently, she pressed down on middle C. The sound was pure and clear, ringing out in the quiet lobby. Isabel held her breath, glancing toward the front desk, but Peter hadn't looked up. Emboldened, she pressed another key, then another, playing a simple C major scale, just like she practiced on her tablet. The difference was incredible. Each note resonated through the piano's body and out into the room, filling the space with sound in a way her tablet never could. Isabel felt a smile spread across her face as she played the scale again, this time with both hands, ascending and descending, growing more confident, She began to play a simple melody she'd learned months ago, Heart and Soul, the beginner piano piece that everyone seemed to know. Her fingers moved slowly but surely, finding each note with care. She was so absorbed in the music that she didn't notice Peter looking up from his phone, his brow furrowed in confusion. She didn't see him stand up from his chair or begin walking toward the piano. She was lost in the joy of finally playing a real piano, feeling the weight of the keys beneath her fingers and hearing the beautiful sounds they produced. It wasn't until she finished the simple song and began trying another melody, one she'd composed herself on her tablet, that she became aware of footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Peter standing a few feet away, his expression uncertain. "Hey, kid," he said, not unkindly. "You're not supposed to be playing that." "Are you a guest daughter or something?" Isabel froze, her hand still on the keys. She should run, she thought. She should apologize and go back to the break room and hope Peter wouldn't report her. But something kept her seated on the bench, her fingers still touching the cool ivory. "I just wanted to try it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just once." Peter ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. "Look, I get it, but I could get in trouble. Mr. Reynolds is really strict about the piano." "Please," Isabel said, looking up at him with pleading eyes. "Just 5 more minutes? I've never played a real piano before." Peter hesitated, glancing toward the front doors and the empty lobby. 5 minutes, he finally said with a sigh. "But if anyone comes in, you stop right away, okay? And don't tell anyone I let you." Isabel nodded eagerly. "I promise." "Thank you." As Peter walked back to his desk, Isabel turned back to the piano with a sense of wonder. She had 5 more minutes to play a real piano, 5 minutes of pure magic before she had to return to her tablet with its silent keys and headphone music. She was determined to make them count. For the next few days, Isabel couldn't stop thinking about those 5 precious minutes at the piano. She had played until Peter had given her a warning look, signaling that her time was up. With reluctance, she had carefully closed the fallboard and slipped back to the break room, her fingertips still tingling with the memory of the keys. The experience had changed something in her. Playing on her tablet no longer satisfied her. It felt hollow and lifeless compared to the rich sounds of the grand piano. She found herself watching the clock each day, noting when the lobby seemed quietest, wondering if she could risk another attempt, but she also couldn't forget the risk. If Mr. Reynolds found out, her mother could lose her job. The thought was enough to keep Isabel in the break room, even as her fingers itched to feel those ivory keys again. A week passed this way, with Isabel fighting her growing desire to return to the piano. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning, everything changed. Lucia woke up with a fever and a terrible cough. "I can't miss work," she insisted, even as she struggled to get out of bed. "We need the money for rent." "Mama, you're sick," Isabel said firmly, pushing her mother gently back onto the pillows. "You need to rest, but what about you?" "I can't leave you alone all day," Isabel thought quickly. "I can come with you like always. I'll stay in the break room and you can rest in between rooms. Maybe Mr. Hector can help with some of your work." Lucia looked doubtful, but another coughing fit seemed to make the decision for her. "Okay," she agreed weakly, "but only for today. If I'm not better tomorrow, we'll have to figure something else out." When they arrived at the hotel, Isabel helped her mother sign in, then guided her to the break room couch. "Rest here for a while," she insisted. "I'll go find Hector and tell him you're sick." She found the maintenance man fixing a leaky pipe in the kitchen. When she explained the situation, his weathered face creased with concern. "Your mama is a proud woman," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "She works too hard. Tell her I'll help with the heavy lifting today, but she should go home if she feels worse." Isabel thanked him and returned to the break room, where her mother was dozing fitfully on the couch. "Hector says he'll help you," she reported. "Maybe you should just go home, Mama." Lucia shook her head. No, I'll be fine after I rest a little. I already have my room assignments. There aren't many checkouts today, so it won't be too bad." Isabel wanted to argue, but she knew how stubborn her mother could be about work. Instead, she helped Lucia get comfortable with a blanket from the lost and found box and a cup of hot tea from the break room kettle. "I'll stay right here with you," Isabel promised, settling into a chair with her book. But after an hour, Lucia insisted on starting her work. "I've already fallen behind schedule," she said, pushing herself up from the couch. She still looked pale, but her determination was clear in the set of her jaw. "At least let me help you," Isabel offered. "I can strip the beds and collect the towels." Lucia hesitated, then nodded. Okay, but just for a couple of rooms. Then you come back here. They worked together on the third floor, with Isabel helping to strip beds and gather dirty towels while her mother focused on cleaning the bathrooms and vacuuming. By the time they finished the second room, Lucia was looking worse, her face flushed with fever and her breathing labored. "Mama, please go back to the break room," Isabel begged. "You're getting sicker." This time Lucia didn't argue. "Maybe just for a little while," she agreed, leaning heavily against the wall. "I feel a bit dizzy." Isabel helped her mother back to the break room and made her lie down on the couch again. "Sleep, Mama. I'll wake you in an hour." Once Lucia had fallen into a restless sleep, Isabel sat watching her with worry creasing her young brow. Her mother rarely got sick, and when she did, she never admitted it. For her to accept help and rest meant she must be feeling truly awful. The thought of her strong, hard-working mother being so ill made Isabel's chest tight with anxiety. They couldn't afford a doctor visit unless it was absolutely necessary. They had no health insurance, and the clinic charged $80 just to walk in the door. As she watched her mother toss and turn on the narrow couch, Isabel made a decision. She would continue the room cleaning herself. She had helped her mother many times before and knew the basics of what needed to be done. If she could finish at least a few rooms, her mother wouldn't fall so far behind schedule. Quietly, so as not to wake Lucia, Isabel slipped out of the break room and found the housekeeping cart her mother had left in the hallway. She pushed it to the next room on the list, 307, and let herself in with her mother's master key. The room was messy but not terrible. Isabel worked methodically, the way she had seen her mother do countless times. She stripped the bed, collected the dirty towels, wiped down surfaces, and vacuumed. She wasn't as fast as her mother, but she was careful and thorough. By the time she finished the room, almost an hour had passed. She checked on her mother, who was still sleeping, her breathing raspy but even. Encouraged, Isabel continued to the next room on the list. She managed to clean 3 more rooms before she needed a break. Her back ached from making beds and her hands were raw from the cleaning chemicals. She had a new appreciation for how hard her mother worked every day. It was just after noon when Isabel returned to the break room to find her mother awake and trying to stand up. "Mama, what are you doing?" Isabel rushed to her side. "I need to finish my rooms," Lucia said, her voice hoarse. "I've slept too long already." "It's okay," Isabel assured her. "I've done rooms 307 through 310. They're all finished." Lucia's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with concern. "Isabel, you shouldn't have done that. If someone had seen you—" "No one saw me," Isabel said quickly. "I was careful. And the rooms look good, I promise. I did everything just like you taught me." Lucia sank back onto the couch, torn between gratitude and worry. "Mija, I appreciate your help, but it's too risky. If Mr. Reynolds found out—" "He won't," Isabel insisted. "Please rest, Mama. You're still sick." After some argument, Lucia agreed to rest a while longer while Isabel brought her some soup from the staff kitchen. When she returned with a steaming mug, she found her mother asleep again, her face still flushed with fever. Isabel placed the soup on the small table and sat down, thinking. There were still 4 more rooms on her mother's list for today. If Lucia couldn't finish them, she might lose her job anyway. The thought made Isabel's stomach clench with fear. She decided to check the remaining rooms to see if any guests had checked out yet. Maybe she could at least get a head start on those. As she walked through the service hallway toward the elevator, Isabel passed by the door that led to the lobby. On impulse, she stopped to peek through the small window. The lobby was quiet as it often was around lunchtime. The front desk was staffed by a clerk she didn't recognize, probably someone new. And there, in its usual corner, stood the grand piano, gleaming in the midday light. Isabel was about to continue on her way when she noticed something. The fallboard covering the piano keys was open, as if someone had been playing recently and forgotten to close it. The sight of those exposed keys, visible even from a distance, made Isabel's fingers tingle with memory and longing. Before she could think better of it, she pushed open the door and walked into the lobby. Her original mission forgotten, she moved toward the piano as if pulled by an invisible string. The new desk clerk was busy with paperwork and didn't look up as she crossed the lobby. When she reached the piano, Isabel stood for a moment, just looking at the keys. Then, almost without conscious decision, she sat down on the bench and placed her hands in position. She hadn't planned to play anything specific, but her fingers seemed to know what to do. She began with a gentle melody, something she had composed herself during those long hours in the break room, with only her tablet for company. It was a simple tune, sweet and a little sad, like rain falling softly on a window. As she played, she forgot about her worries, her sick mother, the unfinished rooms, the risk of being discovered. There was only the music, flowing from her fingertips into the quiet lobby. She didn't notice when the front doors opened, admitting a small group of guests returning from lunch. She didn't see them pause, listening with surprised appreciation to the music coming from the corner of the lobby. She was lost in her own world, adding harmonies and variations to her simple melody, making it more complex and beautiful with each repetition. One of the returning guests was Mrs. Chen, who recognized Isabel immediately. The older woman smiled and held a finger to her lips when one of her companions started to speak, silently asking for quiet so as not to interrupt. The young musician, Isabel, might have continued playing for much longer if not for a sharp voice cutting through her music like a knife. "What do you think you're doing?" Her hands froze on the keys as she looked up to see a man she recognized as William, the head clerk who worked directly under Mr. Reynolds. His face was red with anger as he strode toward her from the direction of the offices. "Get away from that piano immediately," he demanded, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent lobby. Isabel's heart pounded in her chest as she stood up from the bench, her legs trembling beneath her. Everyone in the lobby was staring now. The guests who had been enjoying her music, the new clerk at the front desk who looked horrified at his oversight, and William, whose angry glare made her want to disappear through the floor. "Do you have any idea how expensive that instrument is?" William continued, his voice growing louder. "Who are you anyway? Where are your parents?" Isabel opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She had never been yelled at like this in public before, and the humiliation made her throat close up with unshed tears. "Wait, I know who you are," William said, his eyes narrowing. "You're that Maid's daughter, aren't you? The one who's always hanging around the break room." At those words, Isabel's fear redoubled. Now her mother would surely lose her job. What had she been thinking? "I'm sorry," she managed to whisper, but William wasn't listening. "This is completely unacceptable," he ranted, gesturing wildly. "Staff children are not allowed in guest areas, let alone touching valuable hotel property. What if you had damaged the piano? Do you know how much it would cost to repair?" The lobby had gone completely silent. Every eye was on the small girl being berated by the red-faced clerk. Isabel felt tears welling up and tried desperately to hold them back. She needed to explain, to apologize, to beg him not to tell Mr. Reynolds about her mother. But before she could find her voice again, William made a dismissive gesture. "Get back to the staff area where you belong, and tell your mother I need to speak with her immediately." Isabel turned to flee, wanting nothing more than to escape the staring eyes and William's angry voice. But as she took her first step away from the piano, someone else spoke up. "Excuse me?" said a deep, accented voice from near the front doors, but I believe we were all enjoying the music. All heads turned toward the source of the voice. A tall man with silver-streaked black hair stood near the entrance of the lobby. He wore an elegant charcoal suit that seemed to have been tailored specifically for his lean frame. A pair of wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, behind which keen eyes took in the scene before him. William's expression shifted from anger to something more guarded. "Mr. Novak, I apologize for the disturbance. I was just explaining to this young lady that the piano is not a toy." The man, Mr. Novak, walked further into the lobby with unhurried steps. "Is that what you were doing? It sounded more like shouting at a child to me." Isabel stood frozen, caught between her desire to escape and her curiosity about this stranger who had stepped into the confrontation. The lobby remained silent, the other guests watching with undisguised interest. "Sir, I assure you I was simply enforcing hotel policy," William said, his voice taking on an obsequious tone that contrasted sharply with how he had spoken to Isabel moments before. "This girl is not a guest. She's the daughter of one of our housekeeping staff and has no permission to be in guest areas, let alone playing the piano." Mr. Novak reached the piano and stopped a few feet away from Isabel. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes that suggested both age and frequent smiling, though he wasn't smiling now. "What's your name?" he asked Isabel, his voice gentler than before. "Isabel," she replied, barely above a whisper. "Isabel," he repeated, as if testing how the name sounded. Tell me, how long have you been playing the piano? The question caught her off guard. She glanced at William, who looked impatient, then back at Mr. Novak. I've never had a real piano. I practice on a tablet app. Mr. Novak's eyebrows rose slightly. A tablet app? And what was that piece you were playing just now? Isabel swallowed hard. I made it up. It's just something I hear in my head sometimes. A murmur went through the small crowd of onlookers. Mrs. Chen, who had been watching silently, nodded as if confirming something she had already suspected. You composed that yourself? Mr. Novak asked, his voice reflecting genuine surprise. Without formal training? Isabel nodded, uncertain where this was going, but feeling slightly less afraid now. There was something about the man's calm demeanor that made her feel he wasn't going to make things worse for her. William cleared his throat loudly. Mr. Novak, while this is all very touching, the fact remains that hotel policy— Yes, hotel policy. Mr. Novak waved a dismissive hand. Tell me, does hotel policy include humiliating children in front of guests? William's face flushed an even deeper red. Sir, I wasn't— You were, Mrs. Chen interjected, stepping forward from the small group of onlookers. You were quite harsh with the child, young man. Unnecessarily so. William looked from Mrs. Chen to Mr. Novak, clearly realizing he was losing control of the situation. I apologize if my tone seemed harsh, but— Play something else, Mr. Novak said to Isabel, cutting William off mid-sentence. Isabel blinked in surprise. What? Play something else on the piano? Anything you like. She looked uncertainly at William, who seemed too stunned by this turn of events to object further. Then she glanced back at Mr. Novak, who gave her an encouraging nod. Slowly, Isabel sat back down on the piano bench. Her hands were shaking slightly as she positioned them over the keys. What should she play? Her mind raced through the pieces she had learned on her tablet. Most were simple exercises or beginner arrangements. Nothing that would impress someone like Mr. Novak, who clearly knew something about music. Then she remembered a piece she had been working on for weeks, a simplified version of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. It was still challenging for her, but she loved the haunting melody and had practiced it over and over until her fingers knew the patterns by heart. Taking a deep breath, she began to play. The first notes rang out soft and melancholy. Isabel's nervousness made her start too fast, but she quickly adjusted, finding the proper tempo. She focused on the keys, trying to forget about the people watching and listening. As the familiar melody unfolded beneath her fingers, she began to relax, losing herself in the music just as she had before being interrupted. She made a few minor mistakes, a wrong note here, a slightly fumbled transition there, but she kept going, her small hands moving with growing confidence across the keys. The rich, resonant sound of the grand piano made the piece come alive in a way her tablet never could, and Isabel felt a surge of joy despite the stressful situation. When she finished the last gentle notes, there was a moment of complete silence in the lobby. Then, to her amazement, people began to applaud. Mrs. Chen was smiling broadly, and even some of the hotel staff who had gathered at the edges of the lobby looked impressed. Mr. Novak didn't applaud, but there was a thoughtful expression on his face as he studied Isabel. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, first movement, he said. A simplified arrangement, but played with remarkable feeling. Who taught you this piece? Isabel's cheeks grew warm at the unexpected praise. No one taught me. I found a tutorial online and practiced it on my tablet. I've never played it on a real piano before today. Mr. Novak exchanged a glance with Mrs. Chen, who nodded as if they were sharing an unspoken thought. Then he turned to William, who was standing stiffly by the front desk, his expression unreadable. I'd like to speak with this young lady's mother, Mr. Novak said. William nodded quickly. Of course, sir. I'll have her called up immediately. Isabel's stomach dropped. Despite the brief moment of triumph, reality came crashing back. Her mother was sick, and now she would be called to the lobby to face the consequences of Isabel's actions. Worse, she might lose her job because Isabel couldn't resist the temptation of the piano. She's sick today, Isabel blurted out. My mom, I mean. She has a fever. She's resting in the break room. Mr. Novak's expression softened. I see. Well, perhaps we should go to her instead of making her come to us. William looked horrified at the suggestion. Mr. Novak, guests aren't permitted in the staff areas. It's against hotel policy, yes, you mentioned that, Mr. Novak said dryly. Given the circumstances, I think we can make an exception, don't you? The way he said it made it clear this wasn't really a question. William hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. I'll escort you there myself. Isabel stood up from the piano bench, carefully closing the fallboard over the keys. Her hands were still trembling slightly, but now more from uncertainty than fear. What was going to happen? Who was this Mr. Novak, and why did William seem so concerned about keeping him happy? As if reading her thoughts, Mrs. Chen stepped closer and whispered, Don't worry, dear. Anton Novak is one of the most respected pianists in the world. If anyone can appreciate what you just did, it's him. Isabel's eyes widened. A famous pianist? She had never heard of him, but that wasn't surprising given her limited exposure to classical music. Still, the information didn't ease her worry about her mother. William led the way to the staff area with Isabel, Mr. Novak, and, surprisingly, Mrs. Chen following. Other hotel guests watched curiously as they passed, and Isabel could hear whispers trailing in their wake. As they walked through the service door and down the utilitarian hallway that led to the break room, Isabel tried to prepare herself for what was coming. Her mother would be disappointed, maybe even angry. Mr. Reynolds might still fire her, all because Isabel couldn't stay away from the piano. The break room door was partially open. Isabel could see her mother still lying on the couch, though she was awake now, staring at the ceiling with a worried expression. When the door pushed open wider, Lucia sat up quickly, then froze at the sight of William entering with Isabel and two well-dressed strangers. Mrs. Diaz, William began stiffly, I need to speak with you about your daughter's behavior today. Lucia's eyes flew to Isabel, a mixture of confusion and dread on her flushed face. What happened? She asked, her voice hoarse from coughing. Before William could respond, Mr. Novak stepped forward. Mrs. Diaz, my name is Anton Novak. I had the pleasure of hearing your daughter play the piano in the lobby a few minutes ago. She has a remarkable gift. Lucia looked from Mr. Novak to Isabel, her expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and then understanding. Isabel, she said, her voice a mixture of weariness and resignation. You played the piano? After I told you it wasn't allowed? Isabel hung her head. I'm sorry, Mama, I know I shouldn't have, but it was my fault, Mrs. Chen interjected smoothly. I'm Maid Chen, a guest here. I encouraged your daughter to play when I saw her admiring the piano several days ago. She told me it wasn't allowed, but I insisted. If anyone should be reprimanded, it's me. Isabel stared at Mrs. Chen in astonishment. The older woman gave her a tiny wink before turning a charming smile on William, who seemed completely flustered by this development. Mrs. Chen, while we appreciate your patronage, the hotel cannot be responsible if guests encourage staff or their family members to break established rules, William said, though with far less conviction than before. Mr. Novak cleared his throat. The point, William, is not who broke what rule, but that we have discovered something extraordinary today. He turned to Lucia. Mrs. Diaz, your daughter played a piece of her own composition, followed by Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, with remarkable skill for someone who has never had formal training or access to a real piano. Do you understand how unusual that is? Lucia looked bewildered. She sat up straighter, pulling her sweater closer around her shoulders. Isabel has always loved music. She plays on her tablet all the time, but we cannot afford lessons or a piano. That's precisely what makes her ability so impressive, Mr. Novak said. What we witnessed today suggests a natural talent that deserves cultivation. He paused, then added more gently, Mrs. Diaz, I direct a music foundation that provides scholarships to promising young musicians who lack the financial resources for proper training. With your permission, I would like to offer Isabel an opportunity to audition for our program. The room fell silent. Isabel felt as if she were dreaming. A scholarship? To study music? It seemed impossible, like something that happened in movies, not real life. Lucia's stunned expression suggested she felt the same way. You want Isabel to audition? She asked uncertainly. For a music scholarship? Mr. Novak nodded. The foundation provides not only lessons but also instruments for home practice and performance opportunities. If Isabel is accepted, and based on what I heard today, I have little doubt she would be. It could open doors for her future that might otherwise remain closed. Isabel held her breath, watching her mother's face. Lucia looked overwhelmed, her fever-bright eyes moving from Mr. Novak to Isabel and back again. I don't understand, she said finally. Why would you do this for us? We are strangers to you. Mr. Novak's expression softened. Music changed my life when I was not much older than your daughter. I grew up poor in a small village, but a visiting teacher heard me playing on an old upright piano in the church and arranged for me to study at the conservatory. Everything I have accomplished since then grew from that one moment when someone recognized potential worth developing. He glanced at Isabel with a small smile. Perhaps this is my chance to pass that gift forward. William cleared his throat, breaking the emotional moment. This is all very touching, but it doesn't change the fact that hotel rules were broken today. Mr. Reynolds will need to be informed. Oh, for heaven's sake, Mrs. Chen said with an exasperated sigh. Must you be so rigid? No harm was done to your precious piano. Mr. Novak gave William a measured look. I'd like to speak with Mr. Reynolds myself. When will he be available? William straightened his tie nervously. He's in meetings until this afternoon, but I can arrange for you to see him around 4 o'clock. Perfect. Please do that. Mr. Novak turned back to Lucia. Mrs. Diaz, you're unwell. You should be resting at home, not working. Lucia shook her head weakly. I cannot afford to miss work. We need the money for rent. Mama, I already cleaned some of your rooms, Isabel said, glancing anxiously at William, whose eyebrows shot up in surprise. I was going to do the rest too, but then I saw the piano and... You've been cleaning rooms? William asked incredulously. That's completely against policy. Underage labor, liability issues, improper training. She was trying to help her sick mother, Mrs. Chen interrupted sharply. Perhaps if the hotel provided proper sick leave and health care for its employees, this situation wouldn't have arisen. William's face reddened again. Our employment policies are quite generous compared to industry standards. Hector appeared in the doorway, apparently drawn by the commotion. What's going on? He asked, his concerned gaze moving from Lucia to Isabel to the well-dressed strangers. Before anyone could answer, Mr. Reynolds himself appeared behind Hector, his imposing figure filling the doorway. I was informed there's some kind of situation, he said, his voice clipped and professional. His eyes narrowed slightly as he took in the scene, Lucia on the couch looking feverish, Isabel standing nervously beside her, and 2 clearly wealthy guests in the staff break room. Mr. Reynolds, William said, sounding relieved. I thought you were in meetings all afternoon. My 3 o'clock canceled, Mr. Reynolds replied shortly. Now, would someone explain what's happening here? Over the next few minutes, the whole story came out, from Isabel playing the piano to Mr. Novak's offer of an audition. Mr. Reynolds listened silently, his expression unreadable. When everyone had finished speaking, he turned to Lucia. Mrs. Diaz, you know the hotel policy about family members in guest areas, he said, his tone firm but not unkind. Yes, sir, Lucia replied, her voice small. I'm very sorry. It won't happen again. Mr. Reynolds nodded, then looked at Isabel. Young lady, I understand you were trying to help your mother today by cleaning rooms.